That was my high C. Hey, Jeff Kravitz, 420 Live. Welcome, everybody, to another day in our endless hamster wheel of life, running and running and running. I'm running. Oh, boy. I hope everybody's doing well out there. Welcome. It's nice to be on the planet here amongst the living. The alternative isn't where my head is right now. I'm all about being alive. I think it's a very exciting time to be alive. There's a lot going on. It's like turning on every day to a serial, like grandma used to watch the shows. You'd walk in, grandma be watching the show. She'd be like, shh, be quiet, my show's on. So tell everybody in your house to be quiet because I'm on. We got a lot to talk about today. Our guest is Adam Bauer. Adam is a musician. He is a healer. He's incredibly spiritual. Spiritual. It's a combination of between spiritual and personable. It's a whole new group of human beings, spiritual people. He's spiritual. He's in touch. He's teaching a course on one of my favorite things in life is the I Ching. I mean, a lot of you know me and you're like, this guy from Jersey, this crazy guy from Jersey has this show. He's so out of his mind. He's just nuts. But something you might not realize about me is that even though I was raised Jewish, I don't really believe much about religion. God, I could take or leave. I'm not really big on higher beings. I'm big on spirituality, I'm very spirituable, and I'm big on spirituality. And I guess my relationship with psychedelics is what propelled me into this land of, trusting myself and my heart and where I come up with my ideas. I've had great reading material over my life. I remember being 16 years old in humanities class and the teachers all being wigged out because we were all reading Carlos Castaneda. And I don't know if you know who Carlos Castaneda is, but he wrote a Yaqui way of knowledge, a separate reality. He was a anthropologist who wrote what some people consider fiction, some people consider fact about going down to Mexico and he basically wanted to eat some mushrooms and went down to Mexico because everybody was into the mushrooms in the 50s after Gordon Wassoon went down there for Life magazine and took a bunch of pictures of this old lady, this Quarando. I forget how they called the shamans back then, but she was a shaman and she got in a lot of trouble actually for turning the white man onto the psychedelic plant because all of a sudden all these other tourists started coming down to Mexico and banging on the doors of all the old ladies saying, hey, what are you growing in your garden? And Carlos went down there, one of those people, and he wrote incredible books that as a 16-year-old really, and all of us starting to experiment with psychedelics, we were like heavily into, and not to the consternation of our teachers where they were like, hey, you guys all reading this Don Juan stuff, you better calm down. And you know what? It was the beginning of the awakening. It wasn't the be all end all. It was where my quest for this knowledge, this stuff that we weren't being taught in schools, weren't being taught in our churches and our synagogues and things like that, started feeding through the subculture, through the music we loved and thinking we were just going to concerts and taking a little of this and taking a little of that. And it ended up to a colossal mind expansion. And we can thank our 60s generation, the people that came in, the Owsleys, the Deads, the Keeseys, the chemists, the great chemists, Hoffman and Shulgin and all these guys that created the various tools that we've used in our lives. I have a stack of books. I just went through my bookshelf before we started today to see what I had. And I have True Hallucinations by Terence McKenna. It's a great book. This is about him and his brother finding the shroom in the jungle. Various books on the I Ching because the I Ching needs a lot of interpretation. So you might throw your hexagram, but if you have to know how to interpret it. And now we got the computer. I do all my I Ching casting on the computer. But back in the day, you had to have some kind of book. And I have a couple more of these at home. This is just what I had here. The Food of the Gods, which I think is the quintessential book. If anybody's looking for like an entry-level book to get into reading about great thought and how plants and substances changed our whole culture, how we learn to read and understand symbols. And I couldn't love Terence McKenna more than I do. And I actually got a chance to see him speak at UCLA. I asked a really bad question, but, you know, it was kind of my thing. And, you know, psychedelic shamanism, which is a great guide. This is a good one. And something I've gotten into recently is studying the chakras and how the chakras work in your body. And also, I have some crazy theories about the chakras and music and tones and stuff like that. But our guest today, Adam Bauer, he doesn't, you know, he's probably read a lot of these books and more. And I have a ton of questions from Adam. I wanted you all to meet Adam. We were introduced by my friend Carolyn Davis, and I'm excited to have him on the show. Say hi to Adam Bauer. Hello, Adam.
How you doing, Jeff? Hi, everybody.
How are you?
Super good, man. Good to be here. Thanks for having me on the show.
How'd you like my library?
Beautiful. I have every one of those books. Maybe not the last one.
I figured not the last one, not the chakra book.
Maybe not. I think I'm missing one in that collection, but yeah, I love Terence McKenna is a brilliant mind, and there's a lot of great material in those books that you just shared.
And what was your spiritual awakening? How did it happen for you? And how old were you when you started understanding there was something else?
Basically, that all started cracking open for me when I was about 15, 16 years old, and 16, 17, 18 was a sort of brilliant kind of opening time for me. I had 9th and 10th grade, honestly, were a little bit rough. Like I had some, you know, family challenges, and I ran away from home for a while, and, you know, I was not exactly vibing with late 70s dawning Reagan era America vision. I wasn't really feeling it totally, and I hadn't really found anything creative or productive as an alternative yet. And through a couple of good friends of mine, I got guided to a small crew of people in the Cambridge, Mass area where I was growing up, who were doing massage and healing work and breathing exercises and kind of, you know, urban shamanism to a certain extent, and some, you know, conscious use of plant medicines and other alternative healing reality stuff. And it was an amazing group of people, and the practices cracked me open. So receiving massage, my body just, you know, went through changes like you sometimes can have facilitated by getting good, you know, contact, healing, touch with people. So at 16, 17, 18, and then I moved into that place for 3 years after I graduated high school. And so from 16 to 21, I basically lived in a laboratory in community, bunch of Harvard students, bunch of, you know, smart, interesting, fascinating Cambridge people from high school like me up through, you know, full-on adult people, power players in the space. Fantastic environment. They were all really into the I Ching also. So my father gave me my first copy of the I Ching, and then I found this group of people, and they were all into it. And we were all using the Wilhelm Baines translation, and so that was part of the catalytic healing opening time that was my late teens.
Wow, you really fell into quite a group there in Massachusetts.
I was super lucky. There was definitely some kind of guidance afoot because I was brought right to the perfect place.
I didn't even know that kind of thing existed in Boston or in that area.
Well, Cambridge has a reputation, well deserved, of, you know, being a progressive place where there's some interesting activity going on. So that part's not entirely unexpected. But this scene, I have to say, was like a time out of time kind of environment. Everything about that world was kind of outside of what has especially since then come to be the dominant paradigm, late stage capitalism, making a kind of transactional economy of so many arts and practices which don't neatly fit into a capitalist economic framework, you know. And so this place was totally off the reservation. There wasn't even a donation bowl to throw a 10 spot in if you wanted to for appreciation. There was no charging for the massage. There was no, like, they weren't trying to brand something. It just was a roots, natural, organic.
So it wasn't a cult. They weren't trying to promote some ideology on everybody. It was just, and was it a commune effectively?
It not really, because it was a guy, my teacher, really, at that point, although he wasn't really trying to be a teacher exactly either. He was about 15 years older than me. So he had a little apartment, and that was where a bunch of the action is. And then a handful of us, not me, but a handful of our crowd, rented the duplex next door. And then there were a couple of other encampments, which were part of the Harvard undergrad community. There were a couple of off campus as part of the Dudley Co-op that were a hotbed of, amazing thinking and fantastic personalities, for many years, I think, and including at this time. And so there were a few folks, quite a few folks in our community lived there, were involved with things there. And so that was sort of our satellite place. Those were sort of two branches of the same, bunch of dozens of us who just had a really kind of wonderful.
And I guess in Boston, you need
high watermark for me in terms of culture and learning and integrity. Sorry, what were you saying?
No, I was just saying it's absolutely incredible to hear. I guess in Boston, you need to have houses and indoor places too. I mean, you can't really have like a Topanga Canyon kind of commune, can you?
True enough. Winters were pretty harsh back in those days.
So your religious upbringing, were Jewish growing up, or?
I got nothing really for religion growing up. I came from a sort of mixed mishmash European heritage, and my father came from Jewish stock, Germany and Austria. His folks met in New York in the 1920s, and then it all kind of came from there. My mom was more from kind of a Quaker background, not particularly heavy denominational religious thing at all. The bent towards the Quaker thing, which is about as sweet and groovy as Western religions, get in my book. It wasn't really heavy either. So I grew up with nothing. There wasn't even a conversation about me going to Hebrew school and getting bar mitzvah or anything like that. Like that wasn't even ever talked about. That was a non-thing. It took me moving into that community and hanging out with those folks, because the kind of main guy there was Jewish, and we came to be keeping a bunch of the Jewish holidays throughout the year during the few years that we lived together as one of the kind of devotional practices that we were experimenting with, not because we were guilted into it, but because we were, going deeper into that, many other kind of traditional approaches. And that's when I kind of realized, like, oh my God, I'm half Jewish. It really wasn't a thing growing up at all.
So you didn't have the whole influence, the Hebrew school and all that. How did you? I have this picture up of you, and it's just so disarming with you. Like I'm looking at you now, and I'm looking at this picture.
A few more pounds, a little less hair, but hey, that's the way of aging. I'm probably twice as old as I was in that photograph, give or take a little bit.
Yeah, wow, and a unique base too. Who made that? Do you remember?
This was made by a guy named David King. He grew up in the Amherst area here in Western Mass. He's been living out in Portland, Oregon for a couple decades, being an instrument maker. And he was just beginning to experiment with making these small, kind of unusual bases. And he studied with a guy, Johnny Merck, over in Denmark for some period of time, not forever, but studied with him enough to pick some stuff up. And these are these custom hand-wound Johnny Merck pickups. And he made the bass, neck through body, the whole thing. It's gorgeous. And so, yeah.
Beautiful piece. And so you were playing bass, I assume. How did you become a musician? When did that all start?
That started after I left the communal Cambridge scene when I was about 21 years old. I thought I was coming out to the West Coast. I was aiming towards a remote area in Northern California, but I needed to head back home and kind of mop up my life before that. And I ended up kind of going back and forth between Cambridge and Western Mass, where I was couch surfing with friends, or not old friends at that point, just friends, because we were all so young. I was 21. And I paused here in Western Mass for a minute, and that 6 months turned into the last 35 years, give or take a little bit. And early on, I got to play in some bass with some friends, doing some reggae stuff. I was hanging out at Barrington Hall while I was hitchhiking around the West Coast in that summer of being 20 or 21. And my friend Josh Kaplan was selling everything he owned to buy a plane ticket back to the East Coast. And he was trying to sell this funky old cheap Beatle copy kind of violin style, low body bass, and I don't play the bass, and that thing has no case, and I'm like 3,000 miles from home, and I'm hitchhiking around the West Coast. Like, this is just a no at every level. But I think he smoked me up so much after 2 or 3 hours of being harangued by him at Barrington Hall. I finally gave him $25. I figured if I learn 3 songs and it makes it home, then I kind of got my money's worth out of it. And it made it home, and was then leaning against my bedroom wall when my friend Tony Beckwith came out, and he was a keyboard player, and he was like dying for people to jam reggae with. He was from the Cambridge reggae scene. We're talking the mid 80s now. And he said, you play bass, I'm coming out with my keyboards and we're gonna jam. And I'm like, no, dude, I don't play that thing. I bought it for $25 from Josh Kaplan. I literally have no idea what I'm doing with that thing. And he's like, don't worry, I'm into reggae. The bass lines are totally playable. They're simple. I'll show them to you. We got this. And that turned into a 15-year gig, learning and playing bass with a bunch of my friends in a local reggae kind of rock and roll band called the Equalites.
And a lot of people don't know this about Western Massachusetts, but it's the hotbed of marijuana cultivation in the United States. And some of our best strains come from that area, from Northampton. And
you may know even more than I do about that. I mean, I always think of Northern California, of course, as being
I have friends, the Chem Dog.
Chem Dog. That I was just going to say, the Chem Dog is the strain that it has roots around here. And you'd think, living here for 35 years, I should know who those people are already, and maybe I do, but I don't know that I do.
Oh, anyway. I know them.
All right, fair enough. We'll talk offline.
Yeah, I will connect you with the Chem Dog. The original Chem Dog is a good friend of mine. We used to tour with Fish back in the late 90s. And,
right.
Having that smoke was so different and so unusual that it came from Massachusetts, because I wasn't really thinking of Massachusetts in that mindset. But now I think about it, having a reggae band in Western Massachusetts makes total sense to me.
It totally does. Yeah, it's interesting. The hills and the topography of New England, especially when you get into kind of like Vermont hills and stuff, it's very conducive. It was described to me as similar to the lowlands ranges of Afghanistan, and therefore a place where the seeds from that area, that kind of Hindu Kush varietals, have a chance of really doing like a pretty nice job in the New England.
But I think most of that went indoors, though, because Massachusetts had a really small grow season, right? If you didn't have a couple lights, you only had a small window that you could get one crop out.
Well, yeah, for sure. I mean, I never knew too many people doing indoor things. I'm a little out of the loop these days, I'm afraid. But,
we got some talking to do offline, Adam.
A few years ago, Massachusetts voted in a legal regimen where each person can grow 6 plants per household, 6 plants per person, 12 per household. So if you want, you can have plants in the backyard these days, and that's kind of a beautiful thing, actually.
And there's shops, and it's changing all over America. And also psychedelics is another thing that's changing. Ketamine's now a therapeutic drug. Mushrooms are now legal in Oakland and in Colorado, and I think they're just going to expand. I don't see that stopping. That's, to me, I think that's the greatest equalizer of all, that finally the medicines that are real medicines that can really help people with their psychosis and stuff exist.
Yeah. Well, that certainly doesn't really help anybody except the drug cartels and drug mafias to make illegal a bunch of these drugs that in many cases have such salutary effects on people. Like you say, I mean, these things, a single dose of psilocybin in the terminally ill or people going through intense PTSD or trauma work, is being clinically shown to move the needle tremendously in terms of helping human beings who are living in a traumatized state to some degree resolve and integrate and do the re-knitting work that's necessary to kind of bring the nervous system back online more fully. And I mean, it's a mystery, I think, to all of us how those chemicals work. Like, why is it that you take those mushrooms and they do that? I never really studied the nervous system in that way, so it just is all a miracle to me that you can take these small substances and have profoundly opened perceptual system for a period of time in which to be in the breathing give and take with life with different glasses on. And as many who've gone down that road, to be darn transformative.
Yeah, well, they're amazing tools, and if you've been using them all your life, you have a kind of understanding. You and I discovered these things when we were on the planet for a decade and a half, when the same thing with a lot of our friends. And I was thinking about that today, a decade and a half. And we figured out, okay, there's things that we have to try, different plants, but there's some people that go through 30, 40, 50 years without accessing that area and understanding how they can level themselves. You know, for me, it's kept me out of the funny farm for sure. Maybe put me in there a little bit, a couple times, but I feel like it keeps you sane. It keeps you level. It's coming to the understanding that you have to exist on this planet in a symbiosis with everything around you, and not try to force your way through things, but let yourself flow through things. I mean, that's what it's really, I understand about it. And I was a lifeguard for 10 years. So I knew what it was like. If you fight the tide, you're going to die. So you have to flow with the tide. And that's kind of with life. And I think a lot of people try to fight it too much and can't step outside themselves to see what their influences are. I mean, I think a lot of issues come from our parents. I mean, it sounds to me like your parents weren't trying really to lay a lot on you. Did you feel that as a kid?
No, I mean, my parents, like most parents, did the best they could and did a flawed job of, but you know, they were kind, decent people doing the best they could, and there was a minimum of heavy trips going on. I mean, adolescence was brutal. You know, I ran away from home when I was in 9th grade. Like, it wasn't easy for a few years. It was really rough for a couple of years for me, and then it was rough for me and my folks for some years after that, because I mean, what mom wants to see their kid barely make it through high school and then not go to college for 3 years while he moves in with some guy who's 15 years older than him and is doing, I'm not sure exactly what, in that funky ass little apartment on top of that
Right.
funky ass jazz and reggae club that was in the same we were in. It was a marginal call from a parental perspective. So there were challenging years after that. But for me personally, there were a couple of very challenging years, which could have gone real south if they'd kept going that way. And luckily, meeting this community in Cambridge was one of the several pillars that I was able to build a new worldview from. And when
did you start traveling and expand your worldview? I see you went to India. You've traveled all over the place.
Yeah, I've done a lot of traveling the last couple of decades. I mean, I did a little bit of traveling when I was young. We lived in Germany for a stretch when I was like 5 years old or something. And so I did a little bit of bouncing around until 10th grade. I started doing some real bouncing around. So I got a lot of schools in different states in a few short years. And then I really started pulling kind of summers out west by the time I was, 21 or 22. I think it was like, okay, I'm going to try to get out to the West Coast for at least a couple of months, most every summer. And then at a certain point, I did not grow up with money. Money, I haven't always had an ongoing amount. I've always had just enough. I feel super grateful for the support that I feel like the universe has given me in times when I'm not always sure I've deserved it, honestly. But at the same time, there's not always a lot to play around with. So I didn't do a lot of international traveling for quite some time. But at a certain point, I was able to get over that hump and then, just get on out of here. So I've been to India probably, 15 or 16 times over the last 20 something years. And I've been to South America and the Antarctic even briefly in the last couple of years, and a little bit in Europe, a little across Canada. Been to Japan and Thailand a couple times. So I feel like I could travel half the year every year and still not see half of what I still want to see that I haven't seen in the world. It's just such an amazing planet and so many amazing people on it. But yeah, I love to travel. Before this COVID thing hit, I would say that I probably spent half my time home and half my time over the course of any given year, on the road doing my road thing.
Oh, incredible. And how did you transfer from reggae into sacred chant?
Excellent question. From one devotional music form into another. Basically, that happened because I was going to see a Krishna Das Kirtan program in Northampton, and he was scheduled to go do a week-long kind of retreat at my yoga teacher, Eddie Modestini, and Nikki Doan's really sweet North Shore Maui yoga studio. And so I knew that there was that connection happening. And meanwhile, I was going to see KD that night, and I had a gig with my reggae band in town. You know, a little bit later, I had a 9 o'clock load in. So it was a long hallway. There were a lot of people like waiting in line to get in. And as he walked in, I said, "Hey, I'm just saying hi. I'm Adam. You know, my friends with Eddie." Blah, blah, blah. And by the way, I'm going to be the dude who walks out halfway through your kirtan. I'm so sorry. I've got a 9 o'clock load in, and you're probably going to be right in the middle of some super juicy thing. And I'm just going to get up and walk out. So no offense, dude. I don't mean anything. I'm just like, get to my thing. And I have my bass, that bass that you saw in the photograph earlier, my shoulder. And so he just right then and there, he was like, "Oh, you know, you should come to Maui for that retreat." And I was like, "Yeah, you know, flying to Maui for a week-long yoga retreat, that was like kind of not really the world I was living in, but you know, it sounded like a good idea." He said, "You know, bring your bass." And I thought, wow, that does sound like a good idea. And it didn't quite work out that time because there's actually no electricity in the studio, and my friends were like, "But don't bring the bass." So I did end up going. And it was one of those cases where following my instinct to travel, even though it sort of seemed a little bit indulgent, yielded something magic. Because during that week-long retreat, Christian Das and I were just having lunch on the back deck at some point somewhere, and he was like, "You play bass, right?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, my bass player of the last few years just heading off to do her own thing. Wow. And, you know, you want to sit in, and I got some stuff coming up at Kripalu in May. Like, do you want to play some kirtan gigs?" The dude had never heard me play. And so I was like, "Yeah, man, that sounds like a total gas." And so, you know, I went to his house one time. We spent about 45 minutes rehearsing and going through some stuff. He was recovering from a minor procedure, so just we didn't play for all that long. And then he threw me on stage in front of 500 or 600 people at Kripalu for 3 nights in a row, I think, for a yoga journal conference out there, just packed to the gills. And Krishna Das doing that whole amazing thing that he does and that comes through him, you know, when he's on a good night, and that spirit of Maharaji, or that spirit of devotion, love, that universal thing, that place where you and me and KD and Maharaji and Jesus are all the same. We're all just pulsing, amazing, terrific unity in this crazy diversity that looks so separate. And so it was just boom. He threw me off into the deep end, and that began a 7-year run of playing with KD pretty much at all the stuff around, you know, New York, all the Northeast stuff for the next whole bunch of years. A bunch of the things at Omega Institute with Ram Dass and the Ecstatic Chant weekends out there that Stefan from Omega was putting together. And, you know, just amazing gatherings of fantastic people. I mean, some ripe, beautiful community. That was the 2000s, basically. That started in 2001 with Krishna Das. So that just got me right to the heart of both the Neem Karoli Baba kind of satsang and vibe, and, you know, the Ram Dass and all that circle, and the middle of the American, you know, chanting scene, which was such a sweet place to be.
Well, how big of a scene is it?
I don't know. I thought reggae was a backwater market, and then I found that kirtan probably sells even fewer units than reggae, for God's sake. So it's not a huge, you know, world, which makes it easy if you go to these gatherings. And, you know, places like Bhakti Fest where there's 2, 3, 4, 5,000 people, that, you know, can be hard to find even your friends there. But these things at Omega, you'd have maybe 500, 800 people come together for a long weekend. And that's a cozy enough community that you can really kind of drop in with people, especially if you're there every year, and then a couple times a year, whenever it was. I mean, I was always there on stage playing with KD, sometimes sitting in with other, you know, people who weren't traveling with their own bass player. Through Krishna Das, sort of that whole scene, I ran into Sham Das, who was another amazing young American kid who followed Ram Dass over to India, met Neem Karoli Baba, had his circuits blown, stayed after Maharaji died in 73, and just went deep into North Indian devotional practices and universe. And so I played with Sham Das for, you know, the last 7 or 8 years of his life before he left his body in an unexpected road accident in India back in early 2013. So between the two of those guys, I was just swimming in the deep end of Western Bhakti chanting scene. Very high end and very lucky. And I've just been working my way down ever since then, basically. Now I mostly sit with my harmonium and just accompany myself and sing mostly myself. But for years, I had no ambition at all to like lead kirtan or be a singer or anything. I was so delighted paced with these master musicians and all the great musicians who would always accompany them. That was a great place to be. But in fact, in the course of time, I started coming into experimenting, exploring just what it, my own voice has to say for itself. And so that's how I found myself to the harmonium and to leading.
Well, I know you're sitting right at the harmonium, so I'm going to step out here and let you do your thing here for a couple minutes and let everybody hear your sound. Is that all right?
That sounds great. I'll do an abbreviated. The short kirtan songs are usually about 8 or 10 minutes long, so I'll just do a few minutes of something or other. And
that'd be great.
Right on.
Here we go. Adam Bauer.
I am healing, I am healing, I am healed. I'm safe and peaceful. I am healing, I am healing. I am safe and peaceful in the outside world heartbreaking as it feels. It's the perfect place I'm in. Outside world heartbreaking as it feels. It's the perfect place I'm in. Hariom Tat Sat. Hariom Tat Sat. Hariom Tat Sat. I am happy, I am seen, and I am where I go. I am happy, I am seen, and I am everywhere I go. I feel it. I am blissful, I am conscious, I am true. Love is the essence of my nature. I am blissful, I am conscious, I am true. Love is the essence of my nature. Hariom Tat Sat.
Don't stop now. I'm just going to sing for the next half hour, Jeff. So bail me out before I disappear all the way down the rabbit hole.
It's such an interesting approach to the music. So, what is the genesis of this music? Like, where does it come from?
This chanting practice comes from temple life and home devotional life in India. Everywhere in India, but especially there's a whole North Indian universe of devotional practice bhakti yoga. It's the yoga of love and devotion. Anyone can do it. There's no dogma or Kool-Aid involved. It is basically the yoga of relationship, and also the relationship of sort of our small self to the great self, however we conceive of that mystery of the universe. Like how is it that we are the microcosm of that inconceivably complex and massive macrocosm that we know of in the universe? How does this all work out? So, all the yogas are forms of bridging that gap and bringing together the human with our most aware and manifest expression, however you want to, conceive.
So it's religious songs basically that are used in the.
Basically, they're mantras. They are each mostly what I'm singing is mantras that basically are the names of God. The amount of names and images that the Indian culture throws at the divine, the great mystery, the nameless, unspeakable oneness from which we come and to which we will one day slide home, is staggering. And so there's no sort of fixed image of God is this, or like this is exactly how it works, but they've got a really complex and vivid and colorful universe of ways to kind of express how they perceive that. And
so nobody wanted to have one term for God. The Jews were kind of like this too, right?
I guess so. I mean, how do you to the extent that we can even wrap our minds around anything that would show up as godlike, which is, challenging at best, then how could there be one word? How could there be one syllable? I mean, there's just no way to wrap all of the mystery up into anything. It's like the Tao says, in the Tao Te Ching, the way that can be named is not the eternal way. If we can put a name on it, if we can draw a picture and say, that's it, the only thing we can really be certain about is that is not quite it.
Is that why they go nuts when they draw pictures of Muhammad?
That's a different thing. The Islamic culture developed in a way that they do not use image. They consider that sort of on the edge of, I'm speaking with no authority here, but my understanding, they see that as sort of, that only God is perfect, or only the image of God should be, created for art purposes or any purposes. And so they do incredible things with design and calligraphy and art in a number of different fantastic ways, but they specifically avoid portraiture.
Right.
And so I don't know exactly quite why that is, but it's offensive,
and literally off with your heads for anybody that does it, because that's what happened last week in France too. I mean, it's crazy, but the things they do in the name of God, absolutely astounding, huh?
We're a confused race, that's for sure. Whatever you call human beings, we are really we're amazing. I mean, how can we be so brilliant and so gifted and so creative, and yet also still be bogged down by such old school tribalistic ways of thinking? It's really sad to see.
Well, I think, but there is no one universal truth. Right. It's all interpreted by various religions, and then a lot of different people, everybody gets a hold of it and they're like, okay, this is my thing. This is going to be my thing. I'm going to be a Jew. I'm going to be a Catholic. And then if you understand the parental, I think we were talking about our parents earlier, but my viewpoints on parents is that your parents don't really ask for you to be born. Some people really want kids, but a lot of parents are like, all of a sudden, like, oops, we're pregnant. And then all of a sudden you're born, and then they're like, okay, now what do we do with it? And they're trying to figure out what they're trying to do with you. You're trying to figure out what you're doing on the planet. And it's a huge clash. And that's where the conflict comes from. And a lot of the things that we're programmed with isn't because we're always educating. A lot of people stop educating themselves, I think, and stop learning. And I think that that's a real shame. And I think that a lot of people buy the first thing people tell them. And that's evident to what's happening now with our politics. When I see people on TV talk about casting a vote for somebody because they liked them on television, I'm like, whoa, we're really down to the lowest common denominator now. This is what, and this, we're in the society. I hate to say this, but you being a student of karma knows we're in the civilization that we deserve right now. This is what everything, all our greed, all of the things that we've manifested in, you know, in our world has led to this conflict where we can't get along with our brothers and sisters because of differences in opinions. And it's just, we're in a very, very interesting place. How do we heal our world, Adam? That's not a loaded question at all.
Well, you know, I think it comes down to continuing to do the work of self-development and deepening our self-awareness, whatever that means. I think that's on each of us, and it's on us in small groups of colleagues and friends, and it's on us at the municipal level, and it's on us at the national and the global level. I think we have what we need in terms of technology and material power to shift the world into a dramatically more sustainable and less crazy operating system in terms of resource extraction and kind of all that. But there's so many loaded business interests who are still making money off of the extraction game all the way up to the cliff of destruction. And there has to be a way for us to just change all that, because it's not now that we don't have the technology, we don't have the know-how, we don't have the will. And why, you know, that's not entirely because other people are lame, although obviously other people are lame a lot, but also because I'm not there yet. And so I think at some level it's also on each of us to be, whatever the next steps are for us, to be walking on our own road of personal development, of spiritual evolution, you could call it, of healing. And you know, I did a thing last month. I sang and played some music for a few sessions as part of a global online gathering looking at collective trauma and collective healing, run by a man I've been studying with the last several years, Thomas Hubel, and amazing event actually. And there's an emerging body of work of people who are really looking at trauma, how we are traumatized as individuals, and how entire societies can be traumatized by big nation state, you know, moving events like the Nazi Holocaust or Cambodian Holocaust or Armenian genocide or so many of the other, you know, horrific events that we could name, that these create multi-generational epigenetic reflections and ripples, and that unwinding these things is key at the social level and at the individual level to rewiring our nervous systems, basically, so that we aren't constantly living in and responding from a kind of traumatized place. That, like, the trauma is so brilliant in the way that it then sort of just hides and becomes the thing that we know, you know, especially if whatever happened to traumatize us that was when we were children, we can easily bury those things. And so we think we're seeing the world through, you know, clean glasses, but in fact we have some distortions that we may not even be aware of. And so until we can become more open and free and clean in our perceptive capacity, you know, we can't just point at other people and ask them to do the work. Like, we humans have a lot of work to do to get over the racism and the sexism, the things that just seem so, it's mind-boggling.
It's mind-boggling how
all of these arguments still.
I don't understand it. I thought, you know, I saw Bruce Springsteen on his Broadway show, and the thing that resonated that he said in the show was, I thought we were past this. I thought we were past the racism. I thought we were past the sexism. I thought we were past that. We've grown up, but obviously we haven't. And I agree with what you say when it comes to education. We need to keep educating ourselves. We need to keep learning. And time is flying because the conversation is incredibly interesting. And I know you're in the middle of teaching a course on the I Ching right now. And I wonder how you incorporate the I Ching into your life, and how often you refer to it. Because for me, I find myself turning to it when I have something coming up where I just don't know which direction to go, and I need a little bit of information about where I am in the world, and to understand my perspective. So for me, it kind of gives me a little perspective on what I am, and it is freaking uncanny. Like uncanny, the hexagrams I have thrown and the things I have read from the questions I formulate in my brain. And I don't know if you do this, but I've started using some of the computer programs where I just hit a button to throw my hexagram. Still dead on. So I have so many questions because I just can't wrap my head about how this ancient technology works with this technology we have now and is still effective, and also how you incorporate it into your life.
Yeah, I mean, it really is an incredible practice. I share your wonder at the way it can, with such specificity sometimes, just know the situation and provide unerringly useful guidance and counsel for how to conduct oneself in whatever space we find ourselves in. As I say, I turned on to the I Ching courtesy of my father when I was like 15 or something. By 16, he had given me his book because he saw that I was using it and he wasn't. And at that time, and for a number of years, I basically was in a daily practice, throwing the coins every day. Sometimes I would have, real questions, something I was wrestling with, but often I did it as part of a meditation practice. And I was going to say this actually about in the conversation about psychedelics a while ago, that in a way I feel like psychedelics, as amazing as they are kind of part of a balanced breakfast in a certain way. And that balanced breakfast should also ideally contain kind of meditational practices, grounding practices, things that help us inhabit our body and continue to kind of grow into our essence, our nature. And so I was using the I Ching as a way of sort of mapping the whole territory in a way, and letting the messaging and the guidelines for righteous living in harmony with the Tao, the great way of nature, until I absorbed that at I don't want to say cellular level, but I got them pretty deep in there in terms of my own embodiment of a very non-Western way of sort of thinking about and acting in the world. And so for me, I was in it, every day and in community with people every day. So there was a very fertile learning ground. At a certain point, years into it, I no longer was using it every day, and now I tend to use it when there's really something of import. But sometimes I like to just get another perspective, and I'll sit down and often throw with no question, just allow the I Ching to speak whatever it feels is warranted, and it's really a miraculous practice. Something alive in there. There's something going on. It's not luck. It's not serendipity. It's not
no, and it's not a generalization either, where everything you're reading applies to every situation, which happens a lot in fortune telling. It can be interpreted a lot of different ways. The I Ching is right to the heart of what your question is, and it's just kind of mind-boggling. I've had similar experiences with tarot, with people that are in touch with tarot and able to read cards, that really got in, and I was like kind of scared too, because if you really understand it, how do they compare? Do they compare? Do you think they're on the same level, or are they completely different?
I think they're basically completely different, but the one way in which they are the same as sort of tools of, if you want to say, mediumistic, or some tool to sort of bridge over the unknown waters, or the way a shaman maybe could go to the other places and bring back messages or teachings there. As a tool for doing that, I think a lot really ends up depending on who your practitioner is, So if somebody's really has a tuned in
some people are more in touch than others.
Exactly. And so if they use cards and they can bring it all through for you, brilliant, But
yeah,
as far as tools go, I find the I Ching, at least for me, just has been a more reliable, less woo-woo, more practical, and more obvious and straightforward thing than just like,
right.
There's the Ace of Cups. Now, depends what book I'm looking in, tells me what that means. What does all this mean? I don't know.
But the I Ching also similar too, because it's Chinese translation. So when I go online and put in my hexagrams, I'm always getting 4 or 5 different interpretations of what I threw, all in the same vein. But I find some sites are better than others for interpreting. And the same thing with books. Like I read this book I found in Greenwich Village, just walking down the street, and I had thrown a hexagram that I remembered the number. And when I went in here and read it, it was so spot on. And I had to buy this twice because I gave it to somebody. And that's what I find with all my books. That's my second copy of Food of the Gods, because I'm always like, you have to read this. You have to read this. So it's just passing on the information. But yeah, so the books are interesting too, because you're interpreting Chinese. So it's a little bit over, it's a little bit different, right?
Totally. And I've used since the old days the Wilhelm Bain translation. This is the classic in the field, really. I mean, James Legge had his before, and Littlefield, and there's some other translations out there, but this one, for which Carl Jung wrote the foreword, was translated by a guy, Richard Wilhelm, a German guy. It was actually translated into Germany, but he lived in China, studied with a Taoist master in a very intimate way for a long, long time, and after a long, long time of connection, they came to write this translation together. They translated into German, then translated the German back into the Chinese, and only when they had like refined whatever anomalies showed up in that, they were like, okay, this is a good enough translation. And then Carrie F. Baines, who was a student, she was a student of Carl Jung, and Carl Jung asked her if she would undertake the translation, or at least he was involved in introducing her with Richard Wilhelm and saying, hey, you should translate them into English, which she did. And so there are some anomalies because culture and because, various things. But basically, the Wilhelm Baines, I think, is deservedly still kind of the classic. And it's the one I base everything around. And then I've got another, 30 translations. I can go peeling through any of them if I want some color commentary. But generally, the Wilhelm Baines seems to be the straightest and clearest and most legit and least woo-woo. To me.
The least woo-woo.
It's good, but there can be too much woo sometimes.
Of course. Well, you don't want to get taken away with the woo. You have to keep it. You want to keep the focus, especially when you're trying to figure out what to do. It's funny. You said you threw it every day. Was that overwhelming in the amount of information you were getting?
No, it gave me something to chew on for my morning, for sort of setting the template for the day. And then it gave me something to map the day's experiences, or the more extended time frame experiences. I think even back then, at a fairly early time, I think I started keeping a journal of it so I could go back and see what did I do. Because what I found out is something probably you found out also along the way, is that the I Ching kind of can see around the corner of time and space. It'll sometimes give a heads up on something that I don't know is coming, and I'm not aware of the correlation until I go back later and I read the thing, and I'm like, oh, that's what that line was talking about. If I could have remembered that in that circumstance, and if I paid attention to and embodied the teaching of that line, then I would have had a different experience than the one I did when instead I lost my temper and, whatever. So I learned, it was such an active learning tool for me, and being in community of several dozen other people who were also doing it, we were often comparing readings, and you'd see clusters of like, oh, I just got that yesterday with a different line changed, and so I just ate it up, man. I ate it up. It was not.
Didn't McKenna say that he threw it, and every time he threw it, he got a different hexagram, and then he threw every hexagram or something like that?
I don't recall that part of it. As part of this online course that I'm in the middle of leading now on the I Ching, actually just this week I assigned for homework to be watching, it's about a 30-minute interview that Terence McKenna did. Jeffrey Mishlove was the interviewer, talking about time and the I Ching, and Terence kind of goes out there as he is want to do, as such a brilliant mind. And he has a lot to say and think about the I Ching at a much more complex mathematical and kind of geometry perspective.
Guy was so fucking smart. It's ridiculous.
Guy was incredibly smart. But his thing about the I Ching was very interesting. At some point, I think it was in this interview, it might have been one of the other ones that I was watching, he said, the thing that's like most heavily paraphrased here, but he said, the thing that's really the most powerful about the I Ching, beyond all of these correlations with DNA, numerology, and science and mathematical geometry and stuff, is actually just the fact that it works. It just works. And we don't quite know how that happens. This archaic technology from, long ago. And yet actually the thing about it is that it works. And that's why the I Ching is so relevant today. It's not just some like weird thing that doesn't have a legitimate place if you open to it. People, it's not their flavor, they can't see it, and that's no harm, no foul. But if you are sensitive to it, it's one of the greatest teachers in the world.
Speaking of great teachers,
Oh.
Be Here Now. Be Here Now is one of my favorite books of all time. It's at my house. I don't have it at the office, but I have a copy. I just ordered a new copy within the past year. We lost Richard Alpert in the past year, correct?
We did. It was just around the winter solstice last year.
So if anybody doesn't know watching, this is Baba Ram Das. He was a instructor at Harvard University, and his partner was Timothy Leary. They led some of the first psychedelic experiences in the world. He ended up leaving his job and studying the teachings and becoming Baba Ram Das. Did I have that story kind of right?
Basically, he went to India looking for something that America wasn't offering, and through the Leela of things, met Baba and wrote Be Here Now, ultimately introducing Baba to the West, and became a real bridge for those practices and those teachings. He was really kind of at the forefront of the human potential consciousness exploration explosion of the 60s and 70s and beyond. And partly that had to do with the psychedelics that were fueling some of that. But he went to India and realized, oh, this is much more than taking drugs. This is about entire cultures and historical ways of being that are rooted in the practices like yoga, meditation, breathing exercises, awareness practices that tap us naturally into the power and vibrancy that reality is built on. And you get there without drugs through all kinds of other, individual and social practices, including the chanting of these mantras of God. You do that in a group of people. And if you don't run for the door because it's the weirdest thing you never want to do again, then you might find, dang, this is a great party. Actually, this is there's live music and nice people, and we're all singing. I'm not just listening to somebody else sing. Like, we're all in it, And if you want, you can go to the back and kick your legs at the wall and just chill. Like, you don't have to do the thing. And these practices that actually work, like Terence McKenna said of the I Ching, the thing about these things is that they work, and that's what makes them so fun and so effective.
Well, I am Adam Bauer. There's the website right there. Here's the PayPal. You want to send them a little cash? Everybody loves a little cash.
Oh my God.
And this is Wonder Mountain. You want to talk about that real quick? We got like 30 seconds.
30 seconds. I started a nonprofit a few years ago. Basically, our mission to bring people together and practice, steep in, and enjoy these practices that have been given to us from the ancients, and be in nature and have real communications of a sort that might move the needle towards the better world that we all know is coming, and we want to help birth.
And wondermountain.org, is that also a website?
It's not much of a website at the moment. We're a skeletal organization, and COVID has hit us fairly hard because part of our whole thing is gathering people together in one space outside in nature. And so it's been a kind of challenging year.
And I wanted to give you a Return to the Sacred is the name of your new record, right?
New album dropped October 2nd, Return to the Sacred. I really like it, and feedback's been good so far. So people like it too. Yeah.
Well, Adam, you're a talent. You're in touch. It was great talking to you. This is conversation I have not had on the show yet, so I was excited to get into it. It hit all the right things that I'm really into right now, and our world needs healing. We need people to focus and get on the page. So thank you so much for coming on. Continued success. Everybody reach out to Adam. His music's on Spotify. Check it out.
Thanks so much, Jeff. It's great to be here, and God bless you, and love to all your peeps out there.
Thank you. There. Oops, I'm removing myself. See you, Adam. Have a good night. There you go, Adam Bauer. What a great show today, folks. The diversity is one thing that I love about the show, is that we can talk about a million different things. And as you all know, spirituality, psychedelics, the whole mishmash of where we need to be with our brains and how we keep ourselves sane. It's incredibly important right now, because you have to stay sane out there, because they're coming for you. They're coming for you. They're trying to make you crazy. Don't be crazy. All right, everybody, go in there and watch that mass debate if that's what your thing is, or turn it off. I like to watch the highlight reel. Can't even watch this guy anymore. Take care of yourselves. Peace, love, happiness to everybody out there. There's a big hug tomorrow. Our friend Leon's going to be on talking about new music. Next week, full boat. coming into the weekend. Friday's coming. Have a good night, everybody, and we will talk to you soon.